Hi everyone. Today I would like to talk about more about people and less about plants and seeds and animals, as we have been hearing so far. As it has been mentioned, I'm a researcher at the ex-Hungarian Academy of Sciences. It's a bit loud in my ear. Yeah, it's better. And today I would like to talk about everything that is related to rural living, moving to the countryside, the difficulties that women experience, and what the role of women are in our communities, but also men are very welcome because we're not just going to talk about women, but more in general. I would like to include a perspective, a people care perspective on how we think about care in our communities. And I'm also a member of the Hungarian Permaculture Association, and I mostly work in the people care working group, so that's how we like to think about and thematize some questions. So first I would like to ask, who is concerned here about the future? Raise your hands, please. Okay, who believes they do something on an individual or family level to amend or to address these concerns? Raise hands. Yeah. Who does it in a community? A bit less. Who thinks what they do is something political? Even less hands. Who would call themselves an activist? Yeah. Not so many hands, a few we see still. So mostly these are the questions that I try to unearth on how we think about the actions that we're doing and whether we are a movement or a community or how these different things overlap with each other. And what I brought today is two projects, and I'm gonna give you a sneak peek from each of that, so there's no time to introduce it all. What we started in 2020 was the Her Story Collective, which was a research that we did in our free time, in which we looked into community relations, in food self-sufficiency. We wanted to look into how women as key players act in local initiatives and how to rethink the role of local food production in our communities. I'm not doing these researches alone. I'm part of a research group in the first and in the second case as well. We mostly, by accident, work with women. And so we have a very diverse background. We are 13 of us in the Her Story Collective, or we were originally. It's a kind of a fluid community, and we're not only researchers, but also activists and movement members and women who are engaged in local food production. But they kind of have an engagement with the food sovereignty principles in a certain way, in either having a closer or more distant relationship with it. And what we did in 2021, we interviewed these women, we recorded live story interviews. We were interested in how they got engaged with local food production, what's their story in trying to build a life around food, leaving the city, moving to the countryside, how failures were addressed, whether they moved back to the city because they thought it's too difficult to make this life succeed. We heard some, but not too much, very successful stories. Everyone experiences hardships during these processes. And we collected these interviews and shared the results or the more important topics that are coming up in these experiences. And this project was something that we did in our free time, and I wanted to continue it, and I had the opportunity to be part of a much broader project that is the Sustain Action project. It not only looks into Hungary, so it's much broader. It's a Central and Eastern European focus, and also Sweden is included. We look into civil society's resilience and resourcefulness. We address the context of multiple crises, so we look into how the housing crisis is addressed, how the climate crisis is understood and how it translates into action. And in Hungary, I'm still looking into food-related local initiatives, but we try to compare our different perspectives in this Central and Eastern European context. And what I will show today, and mostly about the research that we did on care, is a comparison with the Czech and Polish colleagues on how their context, in their context, how these definitions of care translate. And we looked into the collaborations between different movements, how feminist and environmental movements mostly try to organize things together and how they try to translate things into a common language and how they want to have a more holistic approach in addressing all these difficult issues that we're facing. So we're kind of in the middle of the project in this part, and we're interested in how individuals engage and how they sustain action towards a common goal. So before I give a little presentation, I would just like to ask you what does care mean to you in your food work or your community in one word? What would you say? And I'm happy to receive answers aloud.
What is the meaning of food work?
Like when you're just being busy with your plants, so nothing too abstract. Either if you're engaged in your own garden or you're doing something more upscale in a more commercial way. Listening, thank you. Responsibility. I know it's maybe not too easy. Attentiveness. Time. Okay, thank you. We usually don't vocalize what we mean by care, and it's something that is in the back of our heads, but it usually comes up in different actions and practices. So why I'm asking why care matters and how we try to make it more concrete or fit to our context. First of all, we were very much interested in how Central and Eastern Europeans think about food sovereignty, the food crisis itself, local food production, what are the difficulties. And I think one of the most important things to consider is that food sovereignty has its very own specific meaning and challenges that is very different from how it used to be framed in Western European contexts or dominant narratives, such as the Nyileni Declaration or the definition of La Via Campesina. So these global models usually talk about political struggle, peasant activism, land ownership struggles, and that is something that I think is difficult to resonate with in Central and Eastern Europe, because here we have much more scattered and quiet forms of activism. It's louder.
It's a bit difficult to hear you.
Okay, I'll try. Yeah? Hopefully. It's just, when it's too loud, it rings in my ears. Yeah. Yeah, maybe the kids in the background are too loud also. So, where was I? Yes, that whatever we do in practice, we rarely call it an activism, and from the raising hands practice in the beginning, we also see almost all of us do something against the crisis of or climate change, and we want to have alternative forms of agriculture, but we never call it activism, or we don't think it is activism that we're doing. So that is something really important to consider when we talk about what is happening here around us. Another thing is that organized food sovereignty movements are very rare, especially in rural constituencies. It's not something that is present or vivid, or it cannot be compared to Southern America and thousands of peasants mobilizing together. So we don't have that, but we have everyday practices that individuals and communities contribute to food sovereignty principles, either by producing or preserving food, having informal exchanges or teaching each other, and these practices all contribute to food sovereignty principles. We can translate them as such, and these actions, whether they come from necessity or from values or from lifestyle choices, what is similar in them is that they all have this deep connection to land, to autonomy, and to care, and how we think about the environment around us. And also women play a very central role in informal food economies, which experiences we found that are very much overlooked in discourses, but also on a policy level. So there is little attention given to women, little attention given to the difficulties of living in rural areas, and little attention to the burdens of care. That is mostly a gendered question, so mostly women bear these burdens. So these are the topics that we want to thematize and we're interested in to understand a bit more better how it has an effect on the dynamics of the communities that we are active in. And to go a bit further from Hungary and to talk a bit general in Central and Eastern European terms, I want to highlight three things. The first one is that maybe it's very evident when we talk among each other, but still in policy discourse, there is a sharp divide on how we talk about local food production. In the Western context, it's very often framed as alternative food practices, which is much closer attached to an activist type of action that we are doing, while it is understood in the East as something that is done for sustenance, for making ends meet, and it comes from more a need than a choice. So there is this binary understanding that I think we should be able to go beyond, that it's local food production is much more than activism or necessity. It is a form of self-sufficiency that is intentional, it is meaningful, and it's often environmentally conscious. And these routine practices are part of local resilience. The second thing is that we work in very diverse foodscapes. We don't only produce food for ourselves, but we also go to the supermarket still sometimes. We go to informal food exchanges, which gives us a lot of flexibility and security in how we make our choices and provide food for ourselves. And these are mostly relying on loose networks, so not social movement type of organization, not big demonstrations and protest type of activity, but the practical part is happening with the connection and networking of these organizations and those communities with each other. And the last is social relations. Food production is rarely an isolated act that is done by ourselves. Food here is not just about nutrition, but it is also about care work and innovation, which is very much often initiated by women, women's circles, mother circles, communities that are happening around local food production that has been initiated by women. There's a lot of literature on that already. So to give you a little bit of overview of the interviews that we made in Hungary, what we found is that the small farms, hobby farms, and community or permaculture gardens that these women are engaged with, they are most of the time the initiators also, or the leaders of these projects. And although they fight traditional gender roles, mostly traditional family roles in village life, they still replicate these practices out of very different practices or ideas, but they try to remain critical about the everyday realities and also how we think about local food production. And these community-based practices are fostering new social networks in the rural constituencies, so they are a very essential part of how to stop the disintegration of communities. They also serve as the backbone of local informal economies, and they blend usually what we found in the talks, that professional and private life is often getting mixed up in these activities, so it's not easily separable. While local food self-provisioning supports resilience, it is often constrained by structural barriers that make these practices difficult to sustain, and especially for women. And here I wanted to show you just a list of the most recurring topics that we found in interviews. So how, when they decided they want to move to the countryside or they want to start with local food production, what were the barriers that they were encountering and what were coming up most commonly in the interviews. And the first thing was that land is expensive, it is often monopolized, distributed via opaque systems. Legal and institutional systems exclude or penalize small-scale food producers, so it is much easier with a larger number or larger amount of land to receive larger sum of subsidies, as we, I think, are all familiar with. And women experience also double burden in this sense when they're busy with their food or activist work, but also family and household care. And someone brought my attention also that it's actually a triple burden because they have to deal with their labor or work life, so it's a kind of a triple division on what to put our focus on. Another thing is that public funding often overlooks the contribution of informal or hybrid livelihoods. These are not accounted for or not given public funding for, and it's a much more invisible type of action that they do. And of course, there's the difficulty of rural infrastructure, the situation of the health system, of education system, on how to reach public services easily from the rural countryside. And most of the best strategy, or what they usually do, and it's also a very privileged thing, is that to keep the contact in a way with urban centers. So they have when a certain issue comes up and they need the urban connection, they can still go there and find public services, which is not always an easy case otherwise. And in response to these structural constraints, many rural women and small producers in Hungary develop creative and adaptive strategies for resilience. There's hybrid sourcing of own produce, informal exchanges, and formal markets. And these women also live very diversified livelihoods by not only gardening, but also doing remote work, relying on local tourism, managing local workshops. And what was interesting to see is that there's a deliberate scaling down in many cases to avoid regulations or remaining informal and small intentionally. So in some cases, we've heard stories where they started to grow and become bigger and bigger, for example, a CSA serving more and more families, and after a while they thought it's too much, so they intentionally went back to serve lesser families to be able to keep the scale and scope and the time reserved for food production. And there was this conscious choice about not growing longer than what they can bear. They're all part of these networks of reciprocity, seed sharing, and collective labor. And we could define these activisms as uneventful activism, which means that food sovereignty is happening much more through workshops, through blogs, showing how it is done rather than protesting. And yeah. What I would like to conclude in these findings, and what I think are really important to say, and maybe it's also banal in a way, but these practices are not just a nostalgia for simpler times. These practices are not happening for our survival, but these are very often skilled, intentional, and community-rooted contributions to resilient food futures. And women are not only producers, but only caregivers, educators, community organizers. These practices offer a different kind of infrastructure, and it's really important that when, for example, institutional spaces are shrinking, education systems don't allow for alternative practices and knowledge to spread easily, when public opinion or governmental policies don't support these ideas, these informal circles are the ones in which knowledge can be kept and shared and reproduced. And when you cannot have this knowledge anymore from the institutional atmosphere, then you can very much rely still on these informal circles to have that. So small-scale agriculture activities, in this way, could also be seen as part of a broader counter-movement to the social disintegration of rural areas. And in this way, I think what we could translate to the Central and Eastern European context is that we still function as a movement, either if it's permaculture or agroecology, or if it's just everyday local food production or food self-provisioning, because they're all part of this bigger direction on how to stop the negative tendencies that we experience in rural constituencies. So now I would like to invite you, I don't want to talk too much. I will still have some things to say, but first I would like to have us together to think about where in your practices care and local food intersect in your life, and maybe we can do these discussions in smaller circles, so not having it very frontally. So I would just like you to talk with each other for a couple of minutes on what does food and community mean in your life. So as I was walking around, I heard different stories of people who are about to engage with local food production, who are doing it on a family or community level already, from the really professional PDC courses also. And I also want to share some stories that we were listening. You can remain at your, maybe, yeah, just turn around. Some stories that we heard about how care has been translated and how these practices were reviving about local food. And I want to show you three different quotes. One was saying, as mothers, as parents, it's obvious that we care about climate change, pollution, because we think about the future of our children. So in this, we try to break it down to different categories, and this very emotional understanding of care is about how motherhood or parenthood is brought into our narratives, and that we want to take care of this earth, we want to take care of the future, we want to take care of our children. So it has this very empathetic dimension of it. The second is more about social action or mobilizing people on what is that we can do and what we should do and how we should do it together. It says, my position is that we are trying to make the distribution of the Earth's finite resources fair, and that is what we are fighting for. It's a hard thing to do, but it's not a murderous ideology, it's not a fascist ideology, it would be a rational decision on the part of humanity. So here, what is mostly coming out of the quote is that how care can also translate as a strategy for making coalitions, something that unites us, fighting for the same causes and goals. And in the last example, it's more about the practice of preventing burnout. When you see that things are really bordering on burnout and such, I think communication and mutual trust really work in our group. Even if someone does not admit to themselves that they are overwhelmed, quite often a few conversations with other members are enough, and suddenly that person starts to say, yes, maybe I overstretched myself. So I think most people who work in organizations, in NGOs, work as an activist can resonate with this quote. So this dimension focuses or translates care more as something that is the glue that tries to hold us together as a community or a group, how we care about each other and how we want our struggle to continue longer and longer, not to burn out too soon. So I hope it is a bit inspiring, and if you wish, I don't want you to put you too much to the highlight, but if you feel like and share a moment when care helped to sustain your food work or activism, and want to share it with the crowd, then please go on.
One moment. It's kind of half invitation for my presentation later today at 5 o'clock here. I will tell about Green Grove Farm, rehabilitation farm. And it is run by a woman and her husband. And when the full-scale invasion started, they were thinking what to do because it is eastern part of Ukraine and it was a lot of bombing there and drones and everything. And they told me, later, like 1 year later, that we, two organizations, organized the project that supported local communities and help internally displaced people to survive in this first month's conditions. So when we call her and ask, do you have some place to for people to stay, and that was very changing moment for them, and they say that they have like just a second that they saw they have to move somewhere, but just after that call and that we show them where they can be needed in this moment, that they are needed in the same place, they decided to stay, and they become very active in all this war situation and helping people and animal. And I think it is not about that care that you meant, because this work caused a lot of burnout for them, but it helps a lot of people, and that could keep their work and their activism for them. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I have another question. So in general, what we can tell about our communities, what is working well, what is missing or fragile in our networks of care, so what are the experiences? And in a more general way, I'm thinking in Central and Eastern European terms on when we try to do these everyday practices of local food production, what are the most common barriers that you encountered or find difficult, or something that helped on the way, or you found a good method to overcome a difficulty? And if anyone else is willing to share one story, I would be happy to hear. I'll give you some time to think. Yeah?
Well, what I think works is a schedule with customers, because people are used to, like, when they go to Lidl, then everything is there. But with especially the small scale farmers, there is a lot of things seasonal, and even in seasonal produce, sometimes it gets eaten by something else than humans. So to have like a schedule that every Tuesday there will be something, but it might be a surprise, keeps people remembering it's Tuesday. It's like a timetable for children, when they go to school. So I think that that's working for the mutual benefit of the farmer and the customers.
Okay, thank you. If no one else wants, Kinga.
I'd like to answer this from a self-care point of view within the movement. I would say what works well, I feel, that's my experience, like kindness works quite well, and that something that doesn't work so well, I think, is setting personal boundaries.
Yeah. That's one heavy thing to learn. Put boundaries on ourselves. Anyone else? No? Okay. So why I wanted to ask you about these things, I often find it difficult to, or I think the people care aspect of permaculture is not always on the top of our thinking, and what it means actually in practice. So what we wanted to show through care is basically these three things that I think especially in our state socialist past, we have this very heavy heritage of talking about politics, which is very difficult, it's very polarizing, but if we talk about care, that is more uniting, and it gives us also a political vocabulary in a way, because it, as I showed, it tells us how to talk about emotions, how to make us active and mobilize in a certain way, and how to take care of each other. It's kind of a political action in its way, but not in the party political sense that is very difficult to talk about, and it just draws fault lines between us. So this type of care is more grounded in everyday life and relational ethics and the mutual support we experience. And from the interviews that we went through with the Czech and Polish colleagues, what we find really interesting also is that instead of talking about these very abstract terms like race, class, and gender, which is also more typical, I think, to Western types of activism, we relate much better with the different type of inequalities that we experience here in our localities, and we focus on gender vulnerabilities, we focus on rural marginalization or the disintegration of communities, and these resonate much better than to talk about these much more abstract notions. So in the end, what we want to argue is that care can be this very transformative narrative for the emotions, the actions, sustaining engagement, where other frames have lost legitimacy. And I talk about also the state socialist past, because of which it's still very difficult to talk about communal living or things in common, commonality, which has this bad resonance maybe in older generations and young ones not that much anymore. But in this way, care can be something that like jumps over or goes beyond this kind of divide that we can experience here sometimes. So that's all I wanted to tell today. I want to thank you for your attention, and we have two websites that I wanted to show you. The first is the Her Story research that we did. We have some full interviews online with the women that we talked to. Unfortunately, it's only still in Hungarian. I really want to work on making English subtitles, so it's for the more adventurous ones. But we also have one of the Sustain Action project that I'm part of now, and we also have a blog post there, so you can check in for updates and how we develop the research further. So that would be on my side, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. Thanks. Yeah.
Maybe some small comment on my side. So I still struggle to believe or understand that in our region, Central Eastern Europe, this food production or in like participation in food system is that much gender issue. I think that now it's more community issue. So the problems which arise, they are the same for both genders. So this is like one, too much extent. Of course, there are gender component, but it's relatively small. And then if you discover that this system is more skewed towards women activism, what would be your recommendation? Is support women or promote gender balance?
I think what you're talking about, thank you for the question. I think it's important. I think you're right, but there's a structural part of the problem and there's a gender part of the problem. And the structural is that perhaps the one that you refer to as a community problem, all the barriers and the frameworks that exist and make it difficult for a community to sustain itself and work towards its goals. And that's also true for men and women, or both genders, all genders equally. While while the gender inequality part is still there, but mostly in terms of women tend to do more of the invisible or reproductive type of work that is work in the background, taking care of the family, taking care of children. Many times we have seen that if the family is doing food production as a business, usually the women are the ones who are having more time in the garden, picking the plants and stuff. The men are more busy with making the business run. And why it's important to talk to both of them, because we hear very different stories. In one case, we heard, when we talked with the husband, we heard the story of how successful the project developed and how big it grew and how many families they are supporting. But when we listened to the wife's side, we've heard all the struggles and internal struggles that they were going through and what kind of breakdowns they had to experience. And so we see both the successful side and the hardships of it, and I think for that it's important to listen to the women's side as well, which maybe doesn't come up when you don't make time for these differences. And there's a lot of other situations when I think. Because it's merely financially logical that the women are the ones who are staying at home and giving up their careers and get detached from a broader society because they are sustaining family life. This is also a type of inequality that exists. So I think they are there, but you're also right that there are more bigger issues, structural issues that need to be addressed, and perhaps if the structural issues would be solved, some of the gender issues would be solved as well. But we need to list them separately and treat them separately. And for what I would like to see is just to have more perspective of women in policy discussions on, for example, how subsidies, how different types of legislation can help this gender imbalance that exists in family life. And that's not something undoable, so there are solutions for that, I guess. It's just not really talked about. Thank you for the question, though. I hope I answered. We have like 5 minutes left.
What's your opinion about the differences between the Western and the Eastern narratives? In a nutshell, why is that kind of difference? What do you think?
Well, if you look at the literature, I can say 2 concepts that define really well the difference. There's a whole stream of literature about alternative food networks, and that's the activist Western type of understanding of it, while the Eastern is translated as food self-provisioning. So the activism is kind of taken out. It's something that you do for yourself. It's informal. It's outside of the market. It doesn't criticize the system. Maybe that's what is translated differently in the 2 contexts. And I think from one dimension of it is that we don't, activism or civic advocacy or civil society organizing didn't develop the same way as in the West, but we still try to use Western narratives on what is happening in the Eastern part, and that's why it doesn't really work and doesn't really fit on what we're doing. And I think it would be more fruitful to incorporate the Eastern understanding of food self-provisioning into food policies and more general agricultural policies, Because there is a big argument, it's not coming from me, but there's a talk about how sustainability, everyday sustainability already exists. We don't need to come up with innovative ways, of new ways on how, well, or technology-heavy solutions for how to live a more sustainable life, but it's already there, it's just not enumerated because it's not part of the market, and you cannot make or put an amount of it on how much it costs and how much its value is. And there's a big advocacy for this type of understanding that, for example, the heritage of home gardening in Eastern Europe, which is much more prevalent than in Western Europe, is something that can be considered as everyday sustainability, that people produce their own food. They don't necessarily go to organic or bio markets and buy the more environmentally friendly version of food, but they do it for themselves. And I think this discrepancy is what makes a big difference.
Thank you. And also you mentioned that in the Western narratives it's gender and race, whereas in the Eastern around care, what you mentioned. And would you argue, would you agree that it's also maybe because in the East, the middle class and people who talk about this are poorer in general than the Western counterparts. So our focus is more like lower down the Maslow pyramid or something like that. Would you agree with that, maybe?
Again, that...
So you mentioned that in the West, it's the narratives are around gender and race.
I would say no, because I think rural towns and settlements are experiencing the same kind of polarization of aging population, of disintegration of communities, of bad public services. If you look at this urban-rural divide exists both on the West and the East. It's not a differentiation that we have only here. I think it's the way like liberal democracy developed. It's more a talk about that, but of course it's a very big topic. Here, these visions and how to live life and different kind of narratives on what we want to achieve were much more imposed from above in the eastern part because of the state socialist past, and I think informality has a much bigger commonality here on not working along the legal and institutional system because it doesn't help our way of surviving and doing things in a practical and easy way. So we do the informal way, and that remained kind of. And we don't protest or try to achieve the change of legislation with advocacy and Western type of activism so it serves our causes, but we just abandon the legal system and do the informal way. Instead, I think that's more typical in the eastern part. Okay, if there are no more questions, I want to thank you all for also taking part in this presentation, and thanks for being here, and now we're ready all to go to lunch.